passionate about.
Continue straight for 25 minutes to I-95 North, Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Sharing your message, speaking on the world, your company, your media, content out there, and why you think it's important for you to continue sharing the message to the world.
You know, I think that there are certain eternal values that we've lost politically, but also just interpersonally. And so for me, the idea of building back up a social fabric where we actually have some values in common is really important. And politics is one means of discussing that. Politics is basically the stuff we fight about at the tip of the iceberg, but the stuff I actually like to discuss is the stuff below that. And that's why when I'm discussing ideas or debating in a college setting, for example, I'm much less interested.
In 1 mile, exit to exit 1, Branch Avenue.
In debating sort of the vagaries of what's going on in the White House. I'm much more interested in sort of root issues as to how do we balance things like our desire for liberty and our desire for communal commitment and capacity. These are things where we actually have to have serious conversations about what matters to us so that we can reach any sort of conclusion or at least clarify where we stand on the issues. Because what you find usually is that there's just not a lot of clarity in political.
In half a mile, use the right lane to exit right, then keep right.
Conversation. And so my job is to try and drill down and not only make as clear as possible what I'm saying, but also try and elicit from the person I'm talking to what is their root core position and what is there for me to disagree with or agree with. And this is the part I've always found a little bit frustrating about the level of controversy that's associated with me, is that when I was at Harvard Law School, my favorite professors were all people who were on the left. I took
Exit right to exit 1, Branch Avenue. Then use the right lane to keep right to Branch Avenue. Red light camera reported ahead.
got a recommendation for law.
Use the right lane to keep right to Branch Avenue.
Jobs from Lonnie Guillier, who's as far on the left as possible to be. She was so far left that when I think it was Clinton nominated her for Undersecretary of Housing and Urban Development, I believe, she was rejected by a Democratic Senate because she's so far to the left. But she and I got along great. I mean, the idea that you have to hate the person that you're talking to is something that I think is really pushed a lot on social media. But if you do that, you can't get to the root of the argument.
You have a conversation.
Yeah.
Right? If you hate the person you're talking to, you're basing things off of emotions, right? You're more emotionally charged as opposed to let me hear what you're saying and then back it with facts.
Right, and it means that you can't have a conversation because the entire conversation is your judgment of the other person's character. And this is why I've always maintained that the first move in any conversation has to be to take that off the table.
Otherwise, the judgment.
Yeah, right. I mean, about the assumption that the person is motivated by something bad. Because probably they're motivated by something good and they're just coming from a different premise. That doesn't mean you're going to leave the room and agree on everything, but it does mean that you're at least going to know what you disagree about, because our tendency as human beings is to...
In 3/4 of a mile, exit to I-95 North, Pawtucket.
Because we're cognitively biased, it's very easy for us to fall into the trap of thinking, I disagree with this person, and that's because this person's a bad person. And this is super true in politics.
Or I don't agree with how their judgment of character or how they handled a certain situation or their viewpoint on one thing, so they're bad at everything.
Right, exactly. And the truth is that we wouldn't treat any of our friends that way. We wouldn't treat anybody we dealt with in regular life that way. On social media, we treat each other that way. And in politics, we definitely treat each other that way. It's a lot easier to suggest that your political opponent's a bad person than it is to actually have the necessary conversations about where you guys differ.
Mm-hmm. So you take away the judgment first when you're going into a debate or some type of conversation. How do you take away that judgment of the other person, or you try to eliminate that judgment of them onto you?
Well, I mean, both. I mean, so we all fail at this. So I try to, in my, myself, I try to say, okay, I'm going to assume this person isn't a bad person. And now I have to try and drill down on what it is that makes them tick. And for them, if somebody comes in with a preconception about me being a nasty, terrible human being, then my first move has to be pretty kind of harsh, which it has to be, you don't have any evidence I'm a bad person other than we disagree. And if that's your feeling, that I'm a bad person just because we disagree, then you are actually the person acting like a bad person. If you are suggesting that I'm evil or nasty or cruel simply because you heard someone one time say that I'm evil, nasty, or cruel without you examining my material, or you've examined my material and what you take away from that is that I'm poor.
In 1,000 feet, exit right.
Motivated, as opposed to we just have a fundamental disagreement on root issues, well, then that's you attempting to avoid the conversation altogether. So that's the first step. And then you can have the conversation. Maybe it doesn't go anywhere. Maybe it does go somewhere, but you're not going to know it.
Exit right to I-95 North, Pawtucket.
You get out of the headspace where the other person is a Nazi.
When you try to go into a place where you know it's heated, then where you're like, this person has said online they don't like me, or they're completely against me, or you just have a gut feeling like this is probably not going to be good, based on whatever. What do you think about going into a speech, a debate, an interview where you know there could be some emotionally charged expressions happening? How do you prepare yourself mentally for that?
So first of all, I treat debate like a game. I watch game tape, in other words. So before I...
Yeah.
Continue straight for 25 minutes to I-95 North, Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
when it comes to this stuff, yeah. I mean, when it comes to debating somebody, I actually will sit there and I will watch how they debate, what are their tactics, what are their favorite tricks to use, what are their favorite facts that they cite. Maybe they've got a point, and I haven't considered that point, so do I have to adjust my viewpoint in order to make room for that point? But you actually have to study this stuff, and I think most people go in debate and they just think, okay, well, I'm just going to go out there and say what I want to say. You actually have to know what the lead tactic is before the person uses it. So, for example, the most famous debate that I was in probably was the one with Piers Morgan. That was sort of the initial kind of boost to top line status for me. It was 2013. It was right after Sandy Hook, and so gun control was being talked about a lot. And so he had been doing this thing where this very intellectually dishonest thing, where he's having on a bunch of people who disagreed with him on gun control, and then he would lead by saying, if you disagree with me on gun control, it's because you don't care about these poor, slaughtered children. And that, to me, was exactly what we're talking about. It's you attacking my character, not attacking my argument. Now, we can disagree on gun control. What's effective, what's not? Do we think certain solutions work and certain solutions don't? What are the rights versus the risks? We can do all of that stuff, and that's important conversation to have. What we can't do is I sit down and the first thing you say to me is, you disagree with me because you're evil. That's not so. So I went into that debate knowing that he was going to lead with that, and before he could lead with that, I essentially punched him in the throat, right? I mean, he basically, it was the Mike Tyson thing, right? Like, everybody's got a game plan until they get hit in the mouth, and that was that. I mean, he started off by saying, you've called me a bully. Why have you called me a bully? And I said, well, Piers, it's because when it comes to these sorts of debates, you stand on the graves of children in order to push your political agenda. And he got very offended, and I said, well, if you want to have a conversation about the topic, we can do that. But if you're going to suggest that I don't care about dead kids because I disagree with you, then we can't have a conversation. You're just being a jerk. And there was no place for him to go because that was his only tactic. Because he wasn't qualified to have the conversation, which is why he was misdirecting to the character assault. Now,
didn't you say, I think I watched the video where you talked about this, that he was going to bring out a kid like after the break?
Yeah, this is right. He brought out a kid who had been crippled who'd been really hurt in a gun violence situation. And his plan was to swivel and have me say, okay, make all your arguments to this kid who's been wounded. And from my point of view, that's a dishonest thing to do because the content of the argument does not change based on who it is that you're talking to. That's an emotional appeal. That's not an argument, it's an emotional appeal. So you can do it, but it's intellectually dishonest to do it. I mean, there's arguments that we make on politics every day, and those political arguments affect any number of people in any number of given ways. The question that you have to ask as an intellectually honest person is, what is the best solution? Understanding that bad things happen in the world. And if your argument changes because you're talking to one audience versus another audience, there's a level of dishonesty to that. And so once I did that, once I said, basically you're emotionally manipulating your audience by stacking the deck against me, he couldn't do that anymore because the trick had been called out. I mean, it's like watching David Copperfield make an airplane disappear, but once you know what he's doing, you can't unsee it, right? Once you know how the woman is being sawed in half, you understand that there's actually, that the woman's not being sawed in half, that the table has a deeper part of it, and you can't unsee the trick at that point.
Wow. Do you ever go into a situation where you kind of do the Eminem 8 Mile, like, yes, I've said this, and yes, I've said this, and I'm bad here, or whatever?
100%, yeah. I do that one all the time, because as a person who's been writing a syndicated column since I was 17 years old, sure, I've said some really dumb stuff, right? I mean, I've said some stuff that I regret. I have a full column that I put online called "Here's a Giant List of All the Dumb Stuff I've Ever Said," right? Because I think that it's important to do that, and some of that stuff was said a year ago or 2 years ago. As human beings, it's our job to grow and change, and not only that, to evaluate where we've gone wrong in the past. One of the things that's kind of nasty about our current political environment is that people made a mistake 10 years ago, and now they don't hold by that. They've never provided any evidence that they doubled down on that, and now we're going back 10 years ago and digging up stuff that they said in order to destroy their careers. I mean, the most obvious example recently was Kevin Hart, where you go back and you find a tweet that he wrote in 2010, and now he can't host the Oscars in 2018 because he said something back in 2010. He tweeted something about how it was an anti-gay tweet, or he suggested that he suggested his 5-year-old, he wouldn't want his 5-year-old son to be gay. Something like that, and so people got all over him for that. Well, he can't host the Oscars now. Well, number one, there's no evidence that he's ever done anything actually anti-gay. Number two, we actually have to, if we're going to do this, we actually have to evaluate the question as to whether you should be barred from hosting the Oscars if you would prefer that your 5-year-old son be heterosexual versus homosexual, which I think is actually an interesting conversation. But more than that, regardless of all that, it's now 8 years later, and you're digging back through some guy's history because you saw he's going to host the Oscars. You saw the Heisman Trophy winner, right? The Heisman Trophy winner, and within a day, they're digging through his old tweets, and they find he called one of his friends gay when he was 14 or something, and now he's forced to apologize. Okay, if he'd committed a murder at 14, then it would have been expunged from his record when he hit 18, right? He would have done it as a juvie. But he tweeted something when he's 14, and now we're going to go back and ruin everything, ruin it. As a society, if we don't have the compassion to say people make mistakes, it's going to be very difficult to move forward. Is your goal to ruin other people, or is your goal to actually forward the conversation? And so to that end, if somebody calls me on something and I feel like I've done something wrong, I'm more than happy to repent for it. I mean, as a religious person, I repent 3 times a day to God, so I'm more than happy to repent for stuff that I've said in the past that I think is bad or stupid or wrong. I write, as I say, I have a full 3,000-word column about it. When people alert me to stuff, that I don't remember everything I've ever said, but people alert me to stuff that I've said that's dumb, and I'll go back and I'll update it, and it's a constantly updated list.
What is a moment where you wish you would have taken back something you've said? You're like, you know what, that was really one of the dumbest things I've ever said, or done, or interacted with, maybe I shouldn't have pushed it that far.
So, I mean, this sort of stuff happens all the time. I mean, first of all, because I was writing when I was 17, there are several columns I wrote when I was 18, 19, 20 years old that are half-baked, stupid, ridiculous.
Yeah,
and
what an 18-year-old would say. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so I've said that was dumb, shouldn't have done that. I've actively rejected my own writing on that score. In terms of kind of interpersonal relations, so a few weeks ago, to take an example, there was a speech that I did at a particular university. I'm not going to mention the university for reasons that are going to become obvious as the story continues. And it's in front of a couple thousand people. And a transgender person gets up and is asking me about my position on transgenderism, which is that men are men and women are women, and women can't become men and men can't become women. Very controversial, but that's the way I feel about this. And so it happens to science. In any case, we're discussing this, and this transgender person, very nice person, is really pressing me on the issue, and we're going back and forth. And at one point, this person brings up his personal stories. A genetic male who is a transgender woman, and when I speak publicly about, so my rule when I use pronouns is that when I'm speaking publicly about the issue, because I believe that gender is biologically based and that he and she are descriptions of biological status, not of subjective mental states. Because of that, when I speak publicly about this, I use biological pronouns in the same way I've always used biological pronouns, as have most human beings, virtually all human beings throughout human history.
So a transgender woman, you were saying?
I will say he for a transgender woman.
Even if they ask, will you use she?
It depends on the scenario. So it depends if it's public or not. So
personal, one-on-one.
If it's one-on-one, for sure.
Gotcha.
Right, because then it's just being rude not to. But if we're discussing it in the context of should I use transgender pronouns or be forced by society to use transgender pronouns, then the answer is no. So on national TV, I've done that, right, and been physically accosted for doing that.
Right, just watched that.
Yeah, exactly. So my position is that in interpersonal relationships, and I did an interview with Blair White, a transgender woman, specifically about this. We were out to dinner, and Blair and I were out to dinner. I would be calling Blair she if there were a third person at the table, because why be a jerk? But it's not the same thing when you're talking about, as a society, what should our standard be for he and she? Are these subjective terms, or do these actually mean something? In any case, this conversation goes on, and the transgender woman starts telling his personal story. And I said, I really don't want to do personal story stuff, because personal story stuff, there's no way to avoid this becoming offensive, weird, and emotionally charged. And this person insisted on telling a personal story. And at a certain point, this transgender person said something, and I said something, and the person became very offended and started to cry and walked out of the room. And I regretted how the entire exchange went. So, I mean, perfect example. So in that case, what I did is I knew the organizers of the event. The organizers of the event, turns out, knew this person. I called this person. I asked them if they wanted this removed from the video version of the tape, because I didn't want this to go out and embarrass, and it turns into a Ben Shapiro Destroys video or something nasty like that. And so we cut it out of the tape. I had breakfast with the person the next day to make sure that they were okay. Right? I mean, when things don't go the way that they should, then I want to make sure that they do. So, I mean, I think this is what anybody with good heart should be trying to do, and we all make mistakes in that process.
Powerful. So you had a one-on-one with this person, and they felt
it was fine. Yeah, exactly. It was fine.
They understood your position, and you're not going to all agree. Not all of us agree.
Exactly, but we can still treat each other civilly and be nice people to each other. And just because we disagree on a public position, even one as broad as that, doesn't mean that we can't be human beings to each other.
Absolutely. Who's the most influential person in your life growing up?
Well, I would say that my parents, obviously. My dad was extremely influential. So my home life was my parents have been married for, let's see, they've been married for nearly 40 years at this point. So thank God I grew up in a, well, actually, no, they've been married longer than 40 years, actually. I grew up in a very stable home. It was great. My mom worked, my dad stayed at home. So that was unusual. My dad was a musician. My parents came out to LA so he could write for film and TV. That didn't really work out, but my mom ended up as a film exec. So having a degree in education. So my dad was home with me, and so that meant that, and I had 3 younger sisters, so he was home with all of us. And so that meant that I was constantly talking with my dad about ideas, and him recommending books for me to read, and me reading books that he didn't recommend, and because he was a musician, I got very into music, and I was a very highly trained musician, and so are some of my younger sisters, actually. And so he was really influential in my life, obviously continues to be influential in my life. As far as sort of other folks who were influential, I had certain teachers along the way. I had a fourth grade teacher in public school named Miss Janetti, who's, I believe now at the Burbank Unified School District, and she was just wonderful. I mean, really focused in on kind of being creative in how I was educated, because I just get certain grades. I skipped third and I skipped fourth grade, but that's terrific. And then,
Dad was with you a lot during the days. What was the greatest lesson he ever taught you?
Well, I think that the biggest lesson he ever taught me is to take everybody you talk to seriously. So with my dad, there really is no gap. I mean, folks who know him, and a lot of folks where I work know my dad, they know that he treats everybody exactly the same. So he whether it's a member of his family or whether he's the kind of person where if you get in an elevator with my dad, he will have your entire life story by the time you get out of the elevator. And it doesn't matter. Yeah. Exactly. It doesn't matter if it's one floor. He'll be your best friend by the end of, like, he has met
Introducing the new Verizon Business Unlimited plans. For as low as $30 per line with AutoPay, get 5G nationwide, plus massive data capacity, plus spam blocking features. Plus, mix and match the right plans for your business. Get more of what you need, none of what you don't. From Verizon, the network businesses rely on. 5G nationwide available in 800 plus cities on most VZ 5G devices. Monthly per line pricing with 5 plus lines on business.
The purpose of a dog or any pet for that is to make you laugh. And if they can do that, they add to your life, they add longevity, they add health. And that's he is one of the kind in that way. All right. Anyway, welcome. I'm Dennis Prager, in case I didn't say, and welcome to the home. Normally, it's just you and now that's interesting. It's just you and me, correct? Yes, just me. Right. It's just you and me, not just you and I. I'm a stickler for these things. But
from Boca Raton, Florida, this is Behind the Bima. On this episode, the rabbis are joined by Ben Shapiro, founder of the Daily Wire and host of the Ben Shapiro Show. Ben discusses getting his start as a media personality, the difference between his public perception and private personality, and why he enjoys learning Daf Yomi. Also, Ben shares his thoughts on being a public figure wearing a yarmulke, and his relationships with people who don't agree with him. Plus, the rabbis discuss Facebook's new ban on Holocaust denial. All this and more, Behind the Bima.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's not our ordinary Wednesday night. It's Tuesday night, 9 p.m. But we are here, Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, together with Rabbi Philip Moskowitz and Rabbi Josh Brody, and we're here to take you
Behind the Bima.
on cue again, as usual. Rabbi Brody, really perfectly timed. Thank God for you, gentlemen. How are you? How was your week so far? We're earlier in the week than we normally are. It's only Tuesday night.
My week is phenomenal. We had a fantastic, really inspiring Simchas Torah at BRS. And now the Yom Tov season of 5781 Rabbi Goldberg is
It's in the books.
in the books.
It is absolutely in the books, and we couldn't be happier, prouder, more relieved than ever that this year went off without a hitch, and there's a lot more to talk about, and hopefully we'll be able to get to that tonight, how this Simchas Torah ranked against others, especially all things considered. But we want to begin by thanking our very generous sponsor tonight. He's sponsored several times. He's a very loyal listener and fan, and that is Donnie Oppenheimer of the Oppenheimer Law Firm, who takes care of any of your legal needs. We have some swag tonight. I'm sure he'll have to provide for you too. You can utilize the services, be in touch with him at oplawfirm.com. Donnie, thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your sponsorship. We really appreciate it tonight and always. We've got a very special guest coming on tonight. Gentlemen, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz, I think more than ever. Rabbi Brody's got the shirt. Donnie's already commenting he's loving the shirt. Rabbi Brody, we've all got the shirt, but my tie didn't go with the shirt, so I didn't. I've been wearing the shirt all day.
The packaging for the swag was just as nice as the swag, by the way.
Yeah, it was. Donnie, thanks for sponsoring tonight and on several occasions. We have a great guest. We've had wonderful guests until now, and we're so grateful for all of them and all their time. Our guest tonight probably has the widest audience and the loudest microphone of anyone we've had yet, even bigger than Behind the Bima, and that's not easy for us to admit. But his podcast has just a few million more listeners than ours, but we're climbing the charts. We're well on our way, and that is, of course, Ben Shapiro. Ben is beloved by many, even to the degree of idol worship, particularly within the Orthodox community, and equally unbeloved by others who disagree sometimes with his opinion and his style. But one thing we can say is it's really extraordinary how he has climbed the ladder and built a media empire and is an enormous influence in the world who listen, and he shapes a lot of public opinion. So I want to take the time now, I don't want when he joins us to take the time to give a little bit of his background. So let me tell for those who don't know, and maybe you're among the few who've never heard of Ben Shapiro. But
The truth is, I hadn't heard of him until he came on Behind the Beam either, so.
Nice try. Ben Shapiro is an American conservative political commentator and media host, and he's an attorney. At the age of 17, he was the youngest nationally syndicated columnist in the United States, editor emeritus of the Daily Wire, which he founded, and he grew to an enormous subscription. He hosts the Ben Shapiro Show, which is listened daily by millions, not only in America, but around the world. I think it's syndicated on 200 stations, daily podcast and live radio show. He editor at large at Breitbart News from 2012 to 2016. He is the author of 11 books. 11 books. Really, what's I think really gripping him for tonight, we're going to go behind the bima on this particular, is that he grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home and he lives a observant Orthodox Jewish upbringing. And maybe he made it big today. We'll talk about some of his statistics of how many people listen, how many people follow him. But he was an ordinary young man. He graduated YULA, YU's high school in LA, where he grew up. He skipped 2 grades, and that way maybe a little unusual. Maybe both of you skipped grades. I did not.
I skipped grades the other direction.
I'm being held back, Rabbi Brody. So, Ben Shapiro skipped actually 2 grades, and he graduated high school at the age of 16. He then went to YULA, where he graduated summa cum laude, and then went to Harvard Law School. where he graduated cum laude, and Harvard in 2007. He worked as a lawyer, and then he launched and began this media empire. And today, he is, I believe, the largest conservative media group. He personally, and the company that he founded, I think it has surpassed even Fox News and others. And so it's really shaping a lot of public opinion. And he does it all with a yarmulke, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. He does it representing Torah and observant Judaism, which faces a huge target for those who don't like, and gives him a huge microphone. And there are a lot of people who love what he stands for. But it's really amazing. He's born in 1984. I think he's 36 years old. 11 books, millions of followers. He's accomplished a lot at a young age. And as I said, love him or hate him, agree with him or disagree with him, you have to admire what he's accomplished, what he's achieved, his prodigious mind, and how he skipped those grades and he climbed that ladder. And he did so with a lot of ingenuity and a lot of creativity. And I think it's something really impressive. And we're excited that we're going to be able to bring him on tonight. And we certainly welcome your questions, your comments. Many shared with us in advance, and others can submit now, whether on YouTube or on Facebook. We see all the comments aggregated, so feel free to share if you're listening later to our podcast. Don't forget to rate and review. And Shapiro doesn't need your help, we do. So rate and review Behind the Bima, and let the world know. We've had phenomenal guests who really inspired. And our goal, one of our guests earlier on, was Stretch, who taught JM in the AM, the great host of JM in the AM, Nachum Siegel. And he taught us that you want to try to get your interviewee to share things that you're the only address that they would share it. Things that you can't hear elsewhere. And that's going to be our goal tonight, and we've been privileged to have that goal. So when you rate and review, when you share about Behind the Bima, you help us get that message out even more broader. And one of our avid listeners points out that Ben Shapiro also has a hobby that I dropped at a young age. He plays the violin. He was a violinist. I think he once actually performed with Eitan Katz. I think the two of them performed together when he was a young man.
Maybe Rabbi Moskowitz and him could do like a special concert one night.
No, I'm the clarinet. He's the violin.
No, I'm saying you could bring out the clarinet that you haven't played in a couple of years. And,
that's right.
I would love that.
The question is, where do you go from here? I mean, you've got the biggest now. Who would you get next week?
We've got
it only takes months and years to get to this point. You've done it overnight.
We've got other people who are lined up. We're getting to the point that people are actually contacting us. How do I get on Behind the Bima? I'd love to be interviewed. I'd love to tell my story. And many have extraordinary stories to tell, and we'd love to have them. So we've got some exciting things lined up for next week. And 2 weeks from now, we are going to be broadcasting from a brand new venue in Boca, who will be sponsoring and featuring some of what is to come in Boca. We will be socially distanced, of course, being very respectful. Different backgrounds, different places, distance from one another, but the same venue, and premiering a new venue in Boca Raton, which we'll be very, very excited to be able to share. So we've got some exciting things coming down the pike, exciting things that are coming very soon near us. What kind of excitement have you seen for tonight's episode? Have you seen stuff online, people talking?
Yeah, Twitter is alive. I mean, every moment you get back on Twitter and you see another dozen people just commenting on what they want to know, what they want to ask tonight.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when my father-in-law knew about it, that's how I knew we made it big. He told my wife, he said, "You're having Ben Shapiro on tonight. It's pretty impressive." And my wife had to Google him, but after she did, but the fact that my father-in-law knew about it, that to me was Dayenu. I've made it. I've arrived. I might be the favorite son-in-law right now.
So just to set the stage, and we'll repeat this when Ben joins us shortly, we are not talking politics tonight. If you want to know Ben's political positions or positions on areas of life policies, he has an extraordinary podcast you can listen to. He is a prolific author, and you can read his opinions. That is not the goal tonight. Tonight the goal is, as we do with all of our guests, to go behind the Bima and to learn about him and see a side of him that we often or otherwise don't know. And I think many of us are curious about. And the goal is to learn. The goal is to understand. One of our themes, seek to understand before being understood. And the goal is to hopefully be inspired also, just to see a person who's attained that position and maybe learn something from it, again, whether you agree or disagree.
In 6 miles, keep left to I-95 North, Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
There's definitely a need out there because we've all been flooded with more questions for this episode than any other episode. And it's not just because of his popularity or his fame. It's because people genuinely want to know these types of things. They don't oftentimes have a venue, a platform to speak to people who have millions and millions of followers. And I think there's a real hunger out there to go behind the Bima with people like Ben Shapiro. So I think it's definitely struck a chord.
Well, I'll actually add on to that. It's not only people who have so many followers. I think it's people who maybe are in ways anonymous. But the point is that when there are public personalities, whether it's a teacher, a rabbi, or some other public personality, people only see them frontally, their lectures and their comments. They don't really get to know them. And so this is really an opportunity to get to know. So without any further ado, we're going to welcome Ben. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Rabbi Efraim Goldberg joined with Rabbi Philip Moskowitz and Rabbi Josh Brody. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing fantastic. It's great to have you on. We really appreciate you giving us some time tonight. We know how valuable your time is, and it means a lot that you're sharing it with us. So, Ben, you were very public about your move from LA and some of the reasons why you moved from LA. I know your media company has moved to another place, but like other famous people before you, brought your talents to the South Florida area. What is it about South Florida? What excites you to be in the South Florida area?
Well, I mean, I think that it was a really easy move for us. We lived in the Valley in Los Angeles, and we were able to replicate the same resources or better in South Florida that we were able to get in the Valley where we were living, without a lot of the problems. So obviously there's a massive crime problem that's hit Los Angeles. They're cutting the police. There's been a fairly severe uptick in anti-Semitism in sort of the general area in Los Angeles during the riots. There were targetings of shuls, for example. The taxes in Los Angeles are incredibly burdensome, so you're paying a lot and you're getting very little in terms of social services, both on the state and on the local level. There's a massive homeless problem that has resulted in serious quality of life issues. Your ability to have your kids walk around the streets safely has really been impeded in a major way. It's very, very difficult to do business there. So then it became an issue of, okay, we want to leave. Where do we want to go? And if you're looking for Jewish communities that have an infrastructure in areas that are more politically akin to where I am, and a tax structure that makes things a lot easier financially, you're now limited to about 2 states. Right? You can't, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, all of that's off limits. Chicago is essentially off limits. If you want someplace with decent weather, we're from LA, right? I mean, we don't want to be in the middle of winter all the time. Then Ohio is off limits, and so now basically you're down to Texas and Florida. And there's smaller communities, obviously. Our company is moving to Nashville. I'm going to be spending a lot of time there, flying back and forth. But the Nashville community is still pretty small. I have 3 kids under the age of 7. I want them to have a lot of resources available, different Jewish schools. I want them to be able to as they get older, date in a large pool. And so it was a really simple choice. It was kind of hilarious because my wife was kind of humoring me. She said, okay, well, we'll go visit and we'll check out South Florida. We had a vacation scheduled for Hawaii for July, then obviously thanks to COVID that got canceled. And so I said, okay, well, I've been wanting to check out South Florida anyway, so let's get on a plane and check it out. And so she said, all right, so we get on the plane and she's figuring that this is just going to be, her giving me my due and then we all forget about it. And instead we come here and within 3 weeks we bought a house, we're getting ready to move. She thought at the beginning we were going to wait a year and that we were going to sort of transition, and then it became clear that there's no reason to kind of live in between. And so we traveled to South Florida in June. We bought a house
in 1 mile. Use the left 2 lanes to keep left to I-95 North, Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
First week of July, and we moved in early October. So it was very, very quick.
It was great to have you, and Ben, I'll tell you, you will find it very refreshing to live in a place where your vote counts and it matters and it makes a difference. And if we can figure out the hanging chads, we actually determine presidential elections, which is really refreshing and really nice. So Ben, earlier today I tweeted that you're probably the most recognized observant Jew in the world, although Jared Kushner and Ivanka might disagree. But I think it's probably safe to say you're the most famous person in the world who wears a yarmulke on a regular basis. Charles Barkley once famously said that he never signed up to be a role model, and I don't know whether you did either. As you were making this climb and this rise, and what you've done at a young age is extraordinary. Not only all the books that you've published, the media company that you've built, the followers that you have.
Keep left to I-95 North, Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
3.2 million followers on Twitter, over 7 million followers on Facebook, millions of people who consume your video, your information, you're influencing. And I'm kind of curious, did you ever consider taking that yarmulke off? Were you ever worried the responsibility that when you wear a kippah, when you wear a yarmulke, you're not just representing your views, but you now have this very public face, maybe the most famous public face on earth of someone with a yarmulke? And did you ever consider taking it off as you made that climb up? Do you think you were ever held back, or did it ever hurt you that you wore the yarmulke? Were there ever times that you regretted you were wearing a yarmulke during a speaking engagement or an encounter that you had wished maybe you weren't?
No, it never occurred to me. I mean, honestly, it never occurred to me not to wear a yarmulke because I've been wearing a yarmulke consistently since I was 10. So there was no point where it was like, okay, now I'm going to make a decision. Do I wear a yarmulke? Do I not wear a yarmulke? It was on my head. It's what I believe. There's no reason for me to take it off. As far as, being, the most famous Orthodox Jew in the world, first of all, pretty small pool. They're not that. There are many more famous Jews inside the Orthodox community than I am. Outside the Orthodox community, it's not like there are tons of people who fit that bill, mainly because most of the people who are famous inside the Orthodox community are famous for being Orthodox inside the Orthodox community, namely people who we all consider role models, right? Rabbanim and spiritual leaders and people who create massive movements. I'm mostly famous for things that have very little to do directly with my religion, although obviously I think my religion shapes my values, which I think gives me a little bit more leeway to say, okay, there's a fair bit of diversity inside the Jewish community politically, obviously. I think not quite as much diversity inside the Orthodox community, because I think there's an actual doctrine that you have to sort of, that you have to abide by that does have some political ramifications.
Continue straight for 9 minutes to exit 21, State Route 16, Newton, Wellesley.
But as far as whether it ever held me back, I never really felt like that. This is an extremely philo-Semitic country. I think in the same way that they're anti-Semites, but this is an incredibly philo-Semitic country. I think this is an incredibly tolerant country for people of all shapes and all sizes and all different orientations. And I think anybody who fails to recognize that truly is being rather ungrateful toward a system that has created so much prosperity and freedom for so many. It doesn't mean that people don't experience incredible hardship and incredible difficulty at the hands of other people. But I cannot say as an Orthodox Jew that the system is designed to harm me in any way, or that the system is discriminating against me in any way, unless I see actual evidence that that's the case. So I've experienced a fair bit of personal anti-Semitism. I was the #1 targeted Jew in the world in 2016 online, according to the ADL. But I don't attribute that to my country, and I don't contribute that to Western civilization more broadly. I attribute that to people who are jerks, and there are plenty of them.
Right, unfortunately, and you've taken the heat for a lot of that. But I think it really is extraordinary that the segment that you used to have on your show, where you talked about the weekly parsha, the fact that you're not afraid to reference the Jewish holidays you're observing and why you might be off the air or not in tune necessarily with what's going on the days that you're missing, referencing the Daf Yomi, referencing your moral values that are shaped by Torah, really does spread that light. And whether the people who agree or disagree with you, the haters and the lovers, I think can all agree that it's beautiful that we live in a world where you're able to represent that, share that, and be able to express that. And that's something which I think is very special. And I wonder whether you draw a line between your Jewish values and some of the other political positions. Are all your positions drawn from Torah values? Do you differentiate or divide between the two? Are there lines that you won't cross because of your Judaism or your Jewish values? Do you have, one of the questions people encourage us to ask, do you have particular rabbis or those you consult with if you feel you're pushing the edge, you want to make sure that what you're thinking conforms with your Torah values?
So, first of all, I don't think that my specific Torah values are something to be crammed down on other people via force of government. I'm not a theocrat. And so my values are shaped by Judaism in the same way that I think that most Western values are shaped, in essence, by revelation. Sinai wrote an entire book on how Western values have been shaped, not just Jewish values, Western values have been shaped by Sinai in combination with respect for human reason that largely springs from Athens. The tenets of balance between Jerusalem and Athens that was first attributed to Tertullian, that's been used as a framework to sort of understand Western civilization for millennia at this point. I think that it's a good framework for understanding these sorts of things. I think it also falls squarely within my Maimonidean framework as well as the Thomistic framework, which is the basic notion that if you are looking at the world around you and you're using science and you're using reason to interpret the world around you, and then it conflicts with Torah, then you're doing one of the two things wrong. And so the kind of notion that the Bible is in conflict with general principles of reason or science, if you believe that the hand of God is evident in both, then obviously the problem is with you, right? Either you're interpreting science wrong and you're interpreting natural law wrong, or you're interpreting the Bible wrong. And so it's your job to sort of rectify those breaches. I think that in Moreh Nevuchim in God to the Perplexed, Maimonides is quite clear about this. Obviously Aquinas is writing very much the same thing for the Christian world at the same time. So that's something that I really do hold by. As far as how that shapes my political values, again, I can think that something is deeply immoral without thinking that it necessarily has to be illegal, which is why I think one of the things I think that religion is good for is not ruling from above. I tend to agree with Shmuel when he is very critical of monarchy, and the basis of religion to me is sort of more bottom-up than top-down, and biblically speaking, it tends to be more bottom-up than top-down, and that's why the Jews are critiqued as a people, not just their leadership is critiqued when something goes wrong. They're critiqued as a people by the prophets repeatedly, because what religion is meant to do is create social bonds between us and to create standards that we all live by. It's not necessarily, particularly in a system that's as diverse as ours in the United States, that has lent so much room for people to practice their religion. There's a vast difference between the creation of social capital and the cram-downs of government. I don't agree with the 2012 DNC slogan that government is the only thing we all share. In fact, I think it's the least of the things we have to share.
Interesting. And do you have, are there people you speak to directly, or mentors, rabbis, guides, who, when you're trying to reconcile, I know you study Daf Yomi, you're obviously on the path
Police reported ahead.
of learning and growing, as we all are, when you think that things are above you in terms of reconciling with Judaism, are there people that you will consult in order to make sure, as you've grown and take on this more public stage and in a certain way represent the Jewish people, that will give you some healthy pushback?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I've studied with a variety of Rabbanim over the years, and mostly because I want to know that what I'm saying about Judaism particularly is accurate. I feel like, Judaism is not my area of expertise, it's something I live in, but I'm not a Rav. And so when people ask me about halakha, I will openly and obviously say I'm not a Rav. I don't paskin halakha, I'm not qualified to paskin halakha. If you want to talk to somebody who's qualified to paskin halakha, there are 3 people on this particular call who are all better qualified than I am to paskin halakha. So, you should ask one of them. If you're asking me sort of like the general framework on where Judaism lands on particular issues, then I can give you sort of a general framework, and then obviously there's a lot of play in the joints. And the more expert you are, it seems very often the more play in the joints there is, and the more complicating factors there are. So I'm not somebody who is qualified to rule in any individual case or any general case. All I can do is sort of give the general philosophical framework for how Judaism approaches issues, and there I do try to look into the sources and determine how Judaism speaks. Now, as I say, there are times when I think the public policy is not to be shaped by specific halachas. So I'll take an easy example. So I'm extremely pro-life. Right? I've gotten pushback from obviously not Orthodox Jews, but also some Orthodox Jews on the basis that Judaism provides for dispensations in a lot of early term abortions. There is a possibility, according to certain, there's a wide variety of opinion on this, ranging from Moshe Feinstein, who's quite strict on it, to Rav Soloveitchik, who's also quite strict on it, to other Rabbanim who are looser about when they're willing to grant dispensation for early term abortion. And the general idea is that, well, if you're so pro-life and you want to ban abortion except under certain circumstances, isn't that conflicting with the ability of a Rav to do a particular thing? Well, again, my read of natural law might fall in conflict with how I would rule if I thought this were to be a Jewish state in terms of a halachic state. But I don't think it's America's job to be a halachic state. I think it's America's job to fulfill basic dictates of morality and to provide the license for all of us to do so individually through exercise of individual freedom.
Amazing. Rabbi Moskowitz.
Wow. First of all, Ben, thank you so much for being on. It's nice to meet you. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about relationships. Obviously, as a very public figure, relationships are probably a little complicated for you. And I guess there are two parts to my question. Number one, when you meet people, which one do you prefer? I guess which one aggravates you more? Does it aggravate you when someone disagrees with you and battles with you and argues with you? Or does it aggravate you when people agree with you, worship you, and try to do everything to make you think that they're on your side? So kind of like, how do you approach relationships in that regard? And I guess there's a second part to that, which is, how do you have relationships, right? How do you have friendships? When you're such a public person, and people want to get close to public figures, and certainly you're moving into a new area, and I'm sure you've had this in LA as well. How do you gauge what's a real relationship, what's someone that shares your values that you want to have that type of relationship for, and when do you say, you know what, you're just looking for someone that you worship, someone who has a lot of followers on Facebook, I don't really want that type of relationship with you?
So it was a little bit difficult to hear because it's breaking up just a little bit. My connection's fantastic. But if I got your first question correctly, you were basically asking if in a relationship I'm looking for somebody who disagrees or somebody who agrees, or how much that makes a difference. Is that correct? Is that what the question was? First
Pretty much, yeah. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So my forgive me, the connection stinks.
In 1 mile, use the right lane to exit right to exit 21, State Route 16, Newton, Wellesley. Then keep right.
The answer to that one is, if I think that somebody is interested in best for me, just like you consider any family or friend, then it doesn't matter to me whether they agree with me or disagree with me on a particular issue. I want people who can tell me when they think that I'm doing something wrong, and maybe better. I hope that I've been trying to do that on a day-by-day basis. There are many cases in the past several years where friends have come to me and they said, 3-4 years ago on Twitter, you said something really nasty about something, and you really might want to rethink that. And I've actually gone out of my way in many cases to publicly recant or to specifically call the person and apologize for it. I hope that I always have room in my life for friends who are able to do that and not just think of them. So that's an important thing. Look, I'm lucky enough that I met my wife before any of this happened. Right, I was 24 and she was 20, and we've been married for.
Exit right to exit 21, State Route 16, Newton, Wellesley. Then keep right to State Route 16 East.
13 years almost, and so I don't have a lot of doubts on the score that she's willing to tell me where to head in when I'm incorrect about something. So that's helpful.
Keep right to State Route 16 East.
I tend to be more of a family person than a friends person by nature. I have usually a couple of close friends, and that's about it. And a lot of my friends are people who I've known really since childhood, and so that tends to alleviate some of the risk of people who just want to get close because of prominence or because it's fun to say that they're friends with somebody who has some notoriety. But honestly, I think that most people don't want that, and the way that you can tell, is really by how much people ask you for things, frankly.
In 1.5 miles, keep right to Washington Street.
It's going to get close because I tend to be more of a family person than a friends person by nature. I have usually a couple of close friends, and that's about it. And a lot of my friends are people who I've known really since childhood, and so that tends to alleviate some of the risk of people who just want to get close because of prominence or because it's fun to say that they're friends with somebody who has some notoriety. But honestly, I think that most people don't want that, and the way that you can tell, is really by how much people ask you for things, frankly. If people are constantly asking you to do things for them, then just like anything else, you're now a service provider as opposed to a friend.
Right.
Does that mean that we can't be friends?
There's a certain number of people in my life get to ask me to do something, but they're all blood relations.
Does that mean after asking you to come out behind the beam?
Well, after we've done this, I think it's all over. It's all over.
Well, let me ask a follow-up, which is,
Yeah, exactly. You shattered the vessel. It's all done. Yeah.
Take our listeners, like, what's it like for you when you go to shul? You go to shul on a Shabbos. Obviously, you're very public about your opinions throughout the week. Do you prefer people smile and nod at you when they see you? Do you prefer people coming over saying hello, trying to connect to you? Do you want to, when you're in shul on Shabbos, that you're kind of in your sanctuary and you don't want to be bothered by that stuff? Or do you go to shul like so many other people for a little bit of the hak, for a little bit of the conversation, and you're curious how what you said during the week played out amongst the people that you're sitting around in shul?
Yes, I mean, some of that is obviously fun. So I've gone to shul with my dad since I was a kid. My parents also moved into the area, and my dad and I have sat next to each other at shul since I was, since before I was bar mitzvah. My dad is an extremely social person. I am far less social than my dad is just as a human being, because my dad is my dad is the kind of person where you get in an elevator with him, and by the end of the elevator ride, he knows your entire life story. He's your best friend. And so my dad really does want to interact with people in that way. During davening, I don't like talking at all. Like during davening, it's my relaxation time actually. So I'm either davening or I'm reading, which are my ways of both connecting and disconnecting, depending on what I'm doing at the time. As far as after show, I'm happy to talk about anything and everything with people, so long as they're always unfortunately without naming any names, of course, there are people who sometimes monopolize your time. There's always a couple people who kind of buttonhole you, and most people don't do that. Most people are respectful of your time. They just want to, they have a quick question, they want to get it answered. I don't have any problem like being part of a conversation with one person or many people. But what is always uncomfortable is having to tell somebody when people can't pick up social cues. When it's like, okay, well, I need to move away now and go check on my kids. That is a cue for, okay, this conversation needs to cease for a moment. And so, sometimes there are people who can't pick up on the social cues. It's not their fault. I mean, it's
In 1,000 feet, use the right lane to keep right. Then keep right.
if I were, there are people I'm sure I would do that to too. I'm frankly bewildered that people want to do that.
Keep right to Washington Street. Then use the right 2 lanes to keep right to State Route 16 East, Watertown.
I mean, I find it flattering that people want to hear my opinion on things. I mean, that's a nice thing. It could be worse. People could definitely not want to hear my opinion on things, I suppose.
Your father's brilliant and a great conversationalist, and I could talk to him forever. I want to ask you, you have an extraordinary section of your website, something very unusual.
Use the right 2 lanes to keep right to State Route 16 East, Watertown. Then turn left on Cherry Street.
Among media personalities, certainly unusual, maybe unheard of among politicians, which is the section on your website where you reference the things that you regret saying or writing, and and how you would do it differently. And my question is the following:
Turn left on Cherry Street.
Your style online sometimes some might interpret it as being a little bit of an agitator. There's an edge. There's a confidence, maybe even an aggressiveness to the positions that you take, and it's been successful. You've influenced countless, and you've built an empire doing it. And I've come to know you a little bit offline to see the softer side. People don't know the kind of extraordinary chesed that you do, that you've used your fame and celebrity to really positively help people, and the kind of generosity that you and your wife have shown with your resources. They don't necessarily know that other side of you. So it's a 2-part question. Number one is, what are the parts of Ben Shapiro
In half a mile, turn left on Derby Street.
you wish people knew about you, the offline, not the tweets, and not the daily podcast, and not the policy positions? What are the softer sides of you that you